Morning. Yesterday, in the opening of our series through Deuteronomy, I said to you that Deuteronomy is one of, if not my favorite book in the Bible, and I often read large swathes of it out loud during my Bible reading time. And the reason I do that is because it is a sermon preached by Moses. And I have always found this sermon incredibly moving and stirring to my faith. It's like an anchor to my soul, and it causes me to want to persist in my faith and to continue to walk well before my God. And so I want to do something a little different with you today. We read Deuteronomy chapters 4 to 6 today being day 2 through the series. And I'm going to read a large part of Deuteronomy chapter 4 to you. And as I read it to you, I want you to imagine that you are one of the children of Israel. You are that second generation now. Your forefathers or your parents are dead in the wilderness. You've gone through that 40-year period and you are about to enter the promised land. And Moses, the old man, before he dies, is pleading with you that when you go into the land, to serve God with fear, to continue to serve Him. And this old man, Moses, is not going to be going with you into the land. You're going to go without him. You're going to say goodbye to him. But before you go, he has something that he wants to plead with you for. And I want you to hear it in that way. So here we are, Deuteronomy chapter 4. Now, I might stop from time to time and make a little comment, but we'll see how we go. Now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I teach you to observe, that you may live and go in and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers, Yahweh, is giving you. You shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of Yahweh, your God, which I command you. Your eyes have seen what Yahweh did at Baal Peor. For Yahweh your God has destroyed from among you all the men who followed Baal of Peor. But you who held fast to the Lord your God are alive today, every one of you. So Moses begins by having recounted in the previous chapters, which we looked at yesterday, how they got to where they are now. And in those verses, Moses had explained how their parents, that previous generation, everyone who was over 20 years old, was now dead in the wilderness because they refused to go in because of unbelief. And he says to them, this next generation, if you were younger than 20 years old at that time, you are alive today. God has kept you alive, with the exception of those of you who worshipped Baal of Peor, in that incident where Balaam, the prophet, had counseled the Midianites to get you guys to commit sexual immorality and idolatry. Those of you who fell at that time, God's also killed in the wilderness. But every single one of you who did not are still alive today. And again, let it be known that God is in control of who dies and who lives and when it happens. So Moses reminds them of this, and then he carries on. Surely I have taught you statutes and judgments, just as Yahweh my God commanded me, that you should act according to them in the land that you go in to possess. Now, as you'll notice, I'm using the covenant word Yahweh every time Moses uses that. That's capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D in your Bible. That's the covenant name that God gave himself to Israel. That's his personal name for Israel as their covenant God. Therefore be careful to observe them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has God so near to it as the Lord our God, Yahweh, is to us, for whatever reason we may call upon him? So Moses says to the people, please observe, I am begging with you, as you go into the land that you're going in to possess, please continue to obey the laws, the statutes, the judgments that I've given you, because this is your wisdom. When people see you obeying this law and they read these laws that you have, they will know that you are a wise and understanding people when they read this law that you have. Because it is self-evident when you read these laws that these laws are right and good and just, and they are for your good. And then he reminds them, he says, what nation is there among the nations of the world that have a covenant God so close to them, who can call upon their God for whatever they might need him for, as you have? I'm begging you, says Moses, please continue to serve the Lord when I'm gone and you've gone into the land. And what great nation is there that has such statutes and righteous judgments as are in all this law which I set before you this day? Only take heed to yourselves, I am begging you, Moses says, and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. And teach them to your children and your grandchildren, especially concerning the day that you stood before Yahweh your God in Horeb, and when Yahweh said to me, gather the people to me, and I will let them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, that they may teach their children. And then you came near and you stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire to the midst of heaven, with darkness, cloud and thick darkness. And Yahweh spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but you saw no form. You only heard a voice. So Moses is now reminding them of that great day at Mount Sinai, Horeb, where God gave them the 10 commandments, and he boomed them out from the top of the mountain, from that boiling mass of fire. He boomed out the 10 commandments, and the people were terrified when they heard his voice. And Moses reminds them, on that day, you heard his voice, but you saw no form. You didn't see any form of God that day. And he's now going to tell them, because of that, don't think that you can go and make an idol in the form of God. You can't. Do not make any idols. So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, the 10 commandments, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. And incidentally, you see there that Moses says that you must teach these to your children. And one of the best things I did for my 3 children when they were young was I taught them the 10 commandments. And they would recite them, and the Apostles' Creed and the Lord's Prayer. Those are the 3 things I taught them to memorize. And those 10 commandments are in my children's hearts. If you still have young children in the home, I can strongly encourage you to do this. Teach them the 10 commandments, even as Moses tells us to do here. He continues, and the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that you may observe them in the land which you cross over to possess. Take careful heed to yourselves, for you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire, lest you act corruptly and make for yourselves a carved image in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, or the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, in the likeness of any fish that is in the water beneath the earth. And take heed. Take heed. He keeps saying this. Take heed. I beg you. Take heed. Lest you lift your eyes to heaven when you see the sun and the moon and the stars and all the host of heaven, and you feel driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord your God has given to all the peoples under the whole heaven as a heritage. And let me warn you as well. Do not ever consult a horoscope or a spiritist or a medium or anything like that, because these things are not God and they cannot guide you. They have been given to all the people of the earth as a heritage to give us light on the earth. They're not to tell your future. But Yahweh, the Lord, has taken you And he has brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be his people, an inheritance, as you are this day. Furthermore, says Moses, Yahweh was angry with me for your sakes, and he swore that I would not cross over the Jordan, and that I would not enter the good land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. But I must die in this land. I must not cross over the Jordan. But you shall cross over, and you shall possess that good land. Take heed to yourselves. Take heed, I'm begging you, says Moses. I'm begging you, take heed to yourselves, lest you forget the covenant the Lord your God made with you, and make for yourselves a carved image in the form of anything which the Lord your God has forbidden you. For the Lord your God, Yahweh, is a consuming fire, a jealous God. When you beget children and grandchildren, and you've grown old in the land, and you act corruptly, and you make a carved image in the form of anything, and you do evil in the sight of Yahweh your God to provoke him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day that you will soon utterly perish from the land which you cross over the Jordan to possess. You will not prolong your days in it, but you will utterly be destroyed. These are just such solemn words of warning. And you know why they're so impactful? Because if you're a Bible reader, you know what happened. You know that these people, not this particular generation, they served God under Joshua, but their children and their grandchildren turned and worshipped idols. And everything that Moses says would happen here happened. Moses goes on now, we're going to see, to talk about how God would drive them from the land. He will give them the promised land, but if they worship idols, he will then drive them from that land, and they will get taken captive, exiled into the foreign lands. And in those foreign lands, they will worship the gods of the armies that have conquered them. And if you're a Bible reader, you will know that that is exactly what happened to Israel. 722 BC, they got the northern kingdom got taken captive by Assyria, and then in 586 BC, the southern kingdom of Judah was taken captive by the Babylonians. Everything Moses is prophesying happened to them. So we continue. And the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where the Lord will drive you. And there you will serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. But from there you will seek Yahweh your God. And you will find him if you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. And maybe that's a word for you today. Maybe you've drifted from the Lord and you've made a shipwreck of your life. But Moses says to you today, in that land where you've been driven and exiled, if you will seek God with all your heart and with all your soul, you'll find him again. When you are in distress and all these things come upon you in the latter days, when you turn to the Lord your God and you obey his voice, for the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not forsake you nor destroy you, nor forget the covenant of your fathers, which he swore to them. For ask now concerning the days that are past, which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth. And ask from one end of heaven to the other, whether any great thing like this has happened, or anything like it has been heard. Did any people ever hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as you have heard, and live? Or did God ever try to go and take for himself a nation from the midst of another nation by trials, by signs, by wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, according to all that Yahweh your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? To you it was shown, that you might know that the Lord himself is God. There is none other besides him. Out of heaven he let you hear his voice, that he might instruct you. On earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of the fire. And because he loved your fathers, therefore he chose their descendants after them, and he brought you out of Egypt with his presence, with his mighty power, driving out from before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in, to give you their land as an inheritance, as it is this day. Therefore, says Moses, as he concludes, know this day and consider it in your heart, that the Lord, Yahweh, himself, is God in heaven above, and on the earth beneath. There is no other. You shall therefore keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which Yahweh, the Lord your God, is giving you for all time. I tell you, every time I read that, I am stirred to continue serving Yahweh, our God, and Jesus Christ, his Son, because it is for my good. And it is hard sometimes to deny myself lusts and desires that I have as a man. But I am stirred by these words to continue to serve God faithfully and to teach my children to do so, for it is for our good that we may live long in the land that he's given us. So God bless you. I trust that those words are meaningful to you too, and I'll see you tomorrow.